This is the DevSecOps track. When I think about DevSecOps, I just think, can't we all just be friends? Why can't we be friends? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Remi, who's going to talk to us about network security to DevOps. We can be friends. Remi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nathan. So I'm going to walk you through a bit some of the how we can actually be friends, which ended up being pretty funny. Sorry, I just put the right focus, which ended up being pretty funny because this morning I got on my Facebook feed friends reunion. So go figure out how they decided that it was time to show me that on there. The reason for this talk is, I've been on the software side, I've been on the security side for a while, and it's always this push kind of model where it's like, hey, you want to get your service working? Well, here's the 500-page document you have to fill in, and the 6 Excel spreadsheets, and the 20 approvers in there. And what was the kind of classical behavior of that? God, I'm never ever going to open a port again in my life. So the idea around that is, actually, it's not that impossible to get to. And I just want to talk you through some of the experiences and some of the things we've seen around how people are actually doing it today. So with that being said, the few things I'd like to cover today, what's up with security in CI/CD? Obviously, why are we not doing anything on the NetSec side, or limited things on the NetSec side? Why is actually policy a fantastic candidate for that? That actually solves a problem for both sides, both from the security and from the software side. How do we get this to fit in the pipeline? And hopefully a bit of closing thoughts. I heard there was a Q&A kind of thing, so I'm guessing that's going to go to Nathan and so on. So I try to keep some time at the end for that. So quick one, who am I? I'm Remi. I'm just an engineer, a geek, a thinker. I've been in security for a really long time. And if your eyes are sharp, you'll pick up some of the gray hair that's starting to show up in my beard, which is driving my wife absolutely nuts on that. But at least the good side of that, I've built software. I've been on the frustrated side of things with the security folks. I've also been on the security folks, very frustrated about the software developers and how they act in there. And that's what brought me to push for this integration in the pipelines. So let's get started. What's up with security in CI/CD? So it's kind of interesting. And when I started working in software, it was all about, look, you build something, and security, don't worry, someone else taking care about it. Like, you have to deliver features, and here's the timeline you have to deliver the features on. That's absolutely critical. And you know what? There are teams that are paid just for that, so don't worry. Then the NetSec team happens to be behind, and they take inputs that you send them, usually in Excel spreadsheets, maybe in Google Docs if you're fancy, but that's about it from there. So you take those inputs and you try to follow the corporate guidelines to some extent, and you know that as the bigger you grow, the more impossible it is. And if we were in a live room, I'd probably ask you, who has ever asked an IP to IP port opening because they never wanted to talk to the security folks to open a specific port? And that usually yields about half the audience, and probably the other half are either working in security or they just don't want to get caught on camera. Then you have the security cert teams that try to instrument everything they can in there. And obviously, there's always something special. After all, aren't we all like snowflakes? So people come in as like, oh, my application is so special, so I don't need to have any approval for, like, for example, what kind of stuff? Let's say data loss prevention software or something like that. Like, no, it's okay. We don't need it in our workload. It's going to damage performance. We can't use it. What does that end up doing? Well, kind of this, because like there's lots of frustration that come in. There's the guy, you can kind of see the security folk trying to hold the truck back. Obviously, never really works in there. And probably if you look at the other side, like, people are just looking around, so you can see in the back, the people just looking at the truck crashing in there. So that's literally, I found when I saw that, it's the best explanation ever of what we're going through today. So in the end, why is policy a great place to start to actually solve this? And I just want to emphasize on the word start, because there's a lot of things that can be done to solve this. And I've seen some other super interesting sessions at WTF is a sorry around different options that you can use around that. But I want to focus on policy right now because it really actually falls in perfectly in there. The reason for that, I mean, that's usually what you see on paper, right? It's like you want to expose a service. Well, you have a port to open, and then you have internet, and you have your system. What could go wrong? I mean, how complicated is that to actually set up and get working? Well, yeah, on paper, it's like that. I mean, reality probably is closer to this, where you have some form of DDoS prevention that needs to be configured, and then you got your edge firewalls that are there. Then you probably have another layer of DMZ firewalls. You have an ADC, so ADC and F5 or a Citrix or some form of load balancer, Nginx, whatever you want. Then you got an ingress controller. You got your application. And then because it's never enough, it's like your application is probably talking to some form of cloud in there. And your application will auto scale. So that's kind of the real world environment that we're looking at in this thing. And when you look at that and you think about policy, I mean, how many owners are there in there? I mean, quite a few. DDoS is usually a different team than the team that's handling the DC firewall and NetSec team. They will take on the edge and the DMZ firewall, but then the application delivery team is going to own the ADCs, most likely. Container team will probably own the ingress controller. Then you own your own application. Then the cloud team owns the AWS cloud, and you flip that and replace that by whatever cloud you want on there. And there's no specific choice of why AWS. So when you look at this, you basically want to do this with this, and you want to be able to do that automatically from the pipeline. So let's have a look at what that would look like in that environment. The model we suggest in there, and I do want to emphasize on the suggest and to give you a bit more. I mean, obviously, we have a solution that can help on that. You don't need it, honestly, if you want to build it yourself. And I'll give you some examples of things I've heard some of our customers do on that as well. But in short, we want developer to be able to define his own policy. And he needs to be able to write it in something where he can easily find documentation on. Like, let's Google it, basically. So we want to be able to basically define network policies of Kubernetes. They're well accepted. They're easy to use. They're super well documented anywhere in the world. And you'll always find someone that can help you on that. So it kind of fits all the bill. And obviously, it's not something which is walled on Google, which you have to have an account or whatever to go and find some content. So developer writes his policy. He puts us in source control. So he actually does put it in Git with his application. And there's kind of two reasons for that. I mean, the first thing, we don't want a developer to have to come out of his way to go and interact with the policy system. The second reason, policy is really tied to a specific version of the code. Because if you think about it, if you have a specific commit that's using a new database, for example, while if you were using MySQL before and you're using Postgres now, I mean, you're going to have different ports that you're going to have to use. And the kind of challenge with that is, if I don't actually host the policy with the source code in here, how do I know at which commit exactly you've done that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll tell me, yeah, sure, there's change request. I mean, we all know how that goes. It works well until you have to roll back. And when you roll back because 3 releases further, you decide that you figured out, damn, there's a bug with this thing, we need to roll it back. And when you do that, then it's like, oh, nothing works anymore. What's going on? Oh, yeah, actually, we swapped database. You can't remember that. So the policy is actually blocking it now. So those are the 2 reasons why we think that policy actually lies really well in source control. Then we have our build pipeline, Jenkins, drone, circle, whatever you want. I mean, it really doesn't matter at this point. And the first thing we want to get through is a linter. And you must be wondering why a linter? It's like, it's a policy, it's a YAML file. I mean, it like linter, great. I mean, people makes a typo and that's it. Well, yeah, but the linter actually does much more than that. The linter is there to also understand what you're trying to do from a policy standpoint. So we will lint one, your policy file to make sure your YAML is standard, but two, we also link to see if your policy is in compliance with what it should be. Take an example. Let's say that your organization defines that HTTP is evil and you should only use HTTPS, as an example. What if a developer comes in and he has this environment, so he has full control on his policy? What if he opens port 80? Well, technically, if it's properly integrated from end to end, I mean, the service will get exposed there. There's rarely a malicious intent in doing that. I mean, in most of the cases, it's literally just, hey, I mean, I thought it was okay, kind of thing. So what we want the linter to do is to say, look, there's some policies and some rules that we define, some guardrails that need to be put in the environment. And so if it fails at this point, just fail the build. Don't wait for the code to actually reach production, promotion, or something like that to be able to tell it, hey, by the way, it doesn't work. Fail fast. Everyone is happy. You don't wait like you're an hour and a half for all your build to run your tests and everything to go and figure out that you actually failed on that. So obviously all those actions are configurable. You could warn, you could fail the build. That's really up to you. On success, you push the policies to dev. So basically you push the exact same policies as they would be in prod and you push them to the dev environment, i.e. you're running all your testing with the actual policies as they should be in the environment. That's very nice because now at this point, when there's some scenarios where, I mean, we kind of know that it's always like dev is always loosey-goosey if you want in terms of policies. And so you hit some snags when you get to prod because dev was not an exact copy or stage was not an exact copy of prod. Well, now you can actually run them with your policies as if they were in prod. And the benefit of that, obviously, I mean, if your tests fail because of policies, the build fail as well. And then when you actually get to the next stage, which would be probably promotion or artifact or whatever you want, well, you actually know that your policy is working from end to end. I think that's kind of the overall workflow, if you want, in this environment. Now, just we kind of went through all that, so I'll just go through quickly. I do have a demo to show you what we mean by that and the ideas we have around that. Policy lives with a specific software build. You know which policy you have at which time exactly. There is no guesswork. There is no going back to ServiceNow or whatever other tool you're using for ticketing to go and figure out what was there at a specific time in there. Policies do impact builds that we kind of know. I mean, it's just if you're expecting full connectivity between systems and you don't have it, some things will not work. Think about the good old days where you had to do things like RPC and stuff like that. I mean, that one was like a classical one that never worked correctly. And then finally, while it is a bit of overhead on the development team, I mean, they get a benefit from it, which is the infrastructure actually gets provisioned with the policy they wanted to. They get feedback on the policy if they're doing something they shouldn't be doing in the environment. And then at the end, I mean, they know the best what their application is. And the reason we're kind of saying that is that at the end, developer knows where the dead bodies are hidden. Honestly, it's like they know very well that there's some areas where they have not tested well. So they know exactly, well, maybe I should put IPS in front of this service because it has been a bit flaky. So I think those are the things which are key, and that's why we think that integration matters there. So how we take the knowledge from the software developer, how it goes through there. Now, there's a few things that come in to play. So the guardrails, which I'll talk a bit more in a minute. the troubleshooting is actually very important in here. And the reason I'm saying that, a development team would be very comfortable with CI/CD and a CLI. I mean, a SSH or whatever. There are code. It's not necessarily the case of the ops team on the networking side. So while you want your developers to be able to get that very neat experience and very seamless experience, you do want the ops teams to be able to pick up in a UI, for example, to do some form of troubleshooting. And that's where having this single view makes things a bit easier there. You push the policy gets into some form of central tool, it gets rendered, and it shows a CLI for the CLI folks, it shows a UI for the UI folks. And that's it. Everyone is happy there. Now, just a quick one on guardrails. That basically summarizes everything you need to know about guardrails, because it's exactly what happens every day. If you don't put restrictions in place, I mean, people are going to stick their head through the guardrails. They will get stuck, and you will have to go and sort them out. So if you think about guardrails, why does it matter? So if you look at an application, let's take this application, which has a bit of SUSE running on Z, for example, because there's always some of that, some Windows containers, and maybe some Linux VMs as part of it. So the application owner defines policies, and those policies look like basically just normal policies inside the environment, and define what he has control on. But developer does not know what, for example, the Z Linux guy knows. And the reason for that is, for example, so Z Linux, fantastic, but maybe you need some specific update server as part of the environment. Maybe you need specific management systems here. So because of that, you do want to let them manage this environment here. And those policies should be more important than yours, because they kind of know what's going there. And you don't want the kind of thing like, I mean, I don't know, for those of you using Qualys and you're in a lab, what's the number one step you do in the lab? You block all the Qualys servers. This way you don't get the warning notifications. So that kind of avoids those kind of scenarios. But then at the same time, let's say that we got the Linux team here is there, and they've set up all the policies in there for, I don't know, syslogin, for example, and other things there. But they should have their policies as well there. And then comes the Windows, because Windows. And finally, you will have the global policies there. So imagine that you come in a situation where your CISO decides of some things. And at the end, why we say CISO, usually she's the one who will go in jail or be on number one on the press if something goes wrong. So she'll define some policies globally around that to say, hey, sorry, like you can't do non-secure protocols, you can't do this, you can't do that. Those rules are predefined at this point. So that's why guardrails are important, and they will be set by other teams for reasons that may come out of the control of developers, because they may see other things that the development team may not see. So that's why we kind of heavily insist on that. Uncle Ben says it's the best: with great power comes great responsibilities. Just make sure you allow people to not fail too bad, if you want, by giving them some form of protections. So hopefully we're all tracking on that. So let's talk through our very simple scenario here. I have a user accessing a Demopod, and this Demopod is accessing prod and dev in there, because obviously everyone knows that prod and dev are always very well separated, and no one ever messes up in terms of permissions here. Well, that allows, in this case, we just assume that, well, the guy running Demopod is actually going to go and basically connect to the prod DB while he's in dev. So not good. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. For this environment, what we're doing, so we're using Jenkins as the CI/CD. Again, you could put anything else. We're using Iteration as the policy engine. I just happen to have access to that. You could do Terraform. You could do Tufin, AlgoSec, or others. I mean, there's lots of options in there. Titration as the enforcement point. I didn't want to deploy firewalls, to be completely transparent with you. So I just wanted to go software based. So that worked out for me. It could be a firewall, could be a security group, could be anything else you want. And if you're curious, this is the pipeline which is actually running here. So this Git repo is open, so you can go and you can have a look at that to see the Jenkins file. All right, so let's have a quick look at what it looks like. So with a bit of luck, you should see my video. And yes, I can see eyes rolling with videos. And I can just like 100% see that. That happened to be hosted in our lab. Lab is what you can expect it to be. And especially with COVID, we did all our preventive maintenance just perfect. So you can be sure that there's drive failures and stuff like that. So I didn't want to go too far. So this is the UI in titration. So I'm just here showing you a policy as it would get rendered in here. And as you can see, there's a few things here that are important to note. The short commit here, which you can go and figure out on GitHub if you want to see which version of that code I was actually applying here. We will see the policies that have been set, and you will see the different kind of subnets and rules that we've defined here. So first thing to note, let me get this zoom wind bar out of the way. So we can use either an IP address or tags. I mean, we remember we talked about scaling and we mentioned the auto scaling thing. Auto scaling based on IP address ain't going to work. Auto scaling based on tags, I mean, that's a good way out. So definitely you want to be able to use both, because campus team will probably identify their user based on subnets. So we have the flexibility to do both. And that's what you'll see in the policy file, basically, to be able to go and say, yeah, well, let's have a look at that. So now we can see our policy here. Which one is showing here? And we can see our pod in the environment. Perfect. Here, our pod is 204. It's 204. So that has been figured out nicely. I'm going to run Jenkins, push my policy through, worked out well, and everything is happy. We did a default deny because that's exactly what you should be doing in terms of policy there. So here's the tags that we defined. And those tags could be VMs. Those tags could be containers, could be AWS, could be anything else. They are designed to be flexible here in the environment. And obviously the ports, the protocol, subnets if you really want to in here, as we want to go through this environment. Let's go now. Now I'm going to go and push my policy now. And you can see that I'm accessing dev, but not prod in this environment here. So now let's rescan. For those of you, why rescan? Again, it's a lab, it's internal. We don't have access to hooks in this environment here. And policies fail at this point. Why does it fail? Well, because I modified my policy. And as I modified my policy here, I actually created a policy that was saying, well, actually, I want to allow non-prod workloads to talk to prod workloads. But actually, this is a deny in here. So when we're talking about guardrails, that's the guardrails we're talking about in this environment. And that allows you to go and push through your policy with the view on the developer. Now, on the assuming that you were doing things right here, let's say that the linter works well. Now we're going to do the same thing. Push our policies here, again, select all our tags and everything. And let me just bring you a little bit forward on this. And oh, interesting. Am I the right one? Yeah, sorry, QuickTime shortcut issue. If I was to push the exact same policy now in the right model here, Yeah, accelerate that. I'm sure you don't want to see all the details. In this environment, you would see that at the end, the policy would actually go through here, and it would build, push, deploy policies. Everything is done. It's magic. It works. I can see my policies here that are defined the way they should be defined. I can see my access working. But the thing that makes it really interesting at this point is if I were to go to something like an F5 device, which is on the path, the F5 gets configured too as part of that. So if you think about the kind of the end-to-end fun thing of, hey, I have to open 5 or 6 different things, well, you don't have to, because that's actually taken care of in the policy. I'm allowing a user to access a service. This service happens to be multiple things, and then we just allow the policy through in that environment. So that's the overall picture. Those demos are available online and they're full length. If ever you're dying to see the complete end-to-end thing, it's like 10 minutes or so. I'm sure no one wants to run through the full 10 minutes now out of 30. So just a few things to close. It's not very hard. I mean, honestly, it's like the policy design is a very easy problem to solve. When you're if you're the last person, if you want, in the chain, because it's pretty simple. The challenge comes in the middle here, where the people actually have to implement it. If you can find a centralized policy model with either you're going the route of Terraform or you're going the route of APIs, you're going the route of something like iteration or something like that, it's actually not that complex to implement from an end-to-end standpoint. As you saw, there's a UI for a policy as well, which means that you have all the instrumentation you need. And it's really non-intrusive. It's literally just one extra file in your repo. You can decide at this point, do I want to enforce it or not? It's basically the only decision you have to make at this point. And then finally, and all that, don't forget to think of the policy as a global thing. It starts and it's across the whole thing. There's multiple teams involved. It's not a thing where it's like, hey, my application is more important than yours kind of thing. No, so think about the guardrails. Think about the layering of enforcement points to get to defense in depth in that environment. And then hopefully at this point, I left exactly 2 minutes for questions on that. I'm sorry, Nathan.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for your talk. There aren't any questions in Brella at the moment. If anyone has questions, please feel free to add. I'm sure Remi will be around, I hope. But we can always reach out to Remi if needed. Thanks so much, Remi.
I'm very happy no one asked questions because it's literally the only time in my life that I finished on time at a session. So thank you, everyone.
Oh, wow. Thank you. We're glad to be part of this moment with you. Awesome. So we have the WTF is SRE quiz coming up in about 1 minute. So anyone that's still around, if you'd like to join the quiz. Remi, thank you so much for your talk. Have a great WTF is SRE conference. It's been a long day for me. But yeah, it's been really great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Carrie.